Hi everyone, welcome to the November 9th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Greg Milkowski, and this is the Breeders' Cup recap edition of the show, as we are going to take a look back at all 14 Breeders' Cup races from last weekend on Friday and Saturday. We're just going to work backwards through the races, starting with the Classic, go backwards through the Friday races, then talk about through the Saturday races rather, and then discuss those Friday races. And Craig, beginning with Saturday, we saw some really big performances, but I think if you're kind of taking the whole day cumulatively, I think the big surprise was kind of the no-shows. We saw some big upsets, and we saw some favorites that were not able to get it done, and a few who actually finished off the board.
Yeah, I think we saw at least one or two that maybe had excuses, and we saw a couple that just didn't run at all. So it was an interesting day. I'll be curious what we hear about some of those horses, but a lot of really good performances to talk about and particularly for some horses that I assume we're going to continue to see race.
Yeah, it sounds like a few of these winners might continue training next year. We'll try to talk about some of those retirements and horses that we'll see again in the coming months as we go through these races based on some of the reporting that's come out over the past few days. But Craig, let's start the conversation with the crown jewel on Saturday, the Breeders' Cup Classic, and Knicks Go facing off against the 3-year-olds. A lot of people expected him to face pressure on the front end. That's not exactly what happened, but Knicks Go is such a naturally fast horse. He was able to establish that lead out of the starting gate, and others just didn't really have any interest in pressing him. He got to set what for Knicks Go is a relatively comfortable pace, and they just couldn't catch him.
No, I mean, the race was basically over before the turn when they all let him go. For me, it was a disappointing race because I don't expect the Breeders' Cup Classic to be a merry-go-round. And in essence, that's what we had. The 1, 3, 4 early horses, basically they ran 1, 2, 3 in the end. The only horse who was able to really make a move was Essential Quality, who made up a little bit of the ground late, so I thought he ran all okay. But I guess that's when you have a speed horse like Knicks Go and everybody's afraid of him, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I saw some differences of opinion about how Knicks Go won this race in terms of the pace. When you see the fractions flash up 23 flat, 45 and 3 for a mile and a quarter, people are generally impressed by that, assuming it's a fast pace. But when you look at the pace figures, Craig, just based on the posted fractions, it was a really even pace, especially that opening quarter, a 127 pace figure compared to the 133 final time figure for Knicks Go. It's not a very fast pace, especially for a naturally quick horse like him who likes to open up on the lead, run those quick fractions. It really was not any kind of pace that was causing him to overexert himself early. And when I watch this race, I have some doubts about the second quarter of this race. It seems unusual at Del Mar to run a faster second quarter than first quarter. So I know you're going to go back and some time this race from video along with a few others just to double check these things, because there were some timing issues at Del Mar on both Friday and Saturday, kind of unsurprisingly given the issues they've had over the past year. No, just based on the posted fractions, it's not like this pace was outside of Knicks Go's comfort zone. And for whatever reason, his main pace rival, Medina Spirit, it seemed like the plan was never to apply much pressure.
No, I saw a quote from Johnny Velasquez where he said he broke kind of slow. I didn't see that. It looked like the plan out of the gate was just not to go. And reading the comments after, it sounds like they were more concerned with getting their best finish and maybe beating the other 3-year-olds more than actually trying to win the race. Maybe that's not the case. It's hard to read people's minds, and who knows afterwards how truthful they're being. But I don't think Medina Spirit was given his best chance to win. That said, he ran great, and that's why, to me, it's a little bit disappointing. I mean, he ran a good second, ran his best ever TimeformUS speed figure of 129. I should mention Knicks Go got a 132, which is in line with what he pretty much always runs this year when he runs a good race. But yeah, I would have liked to seen him take him on, because a lot of people are speculating that had he pressed him, he would have finished in the back of the pack and he would have quit. And I'm not so sure about that, because I'm in the camp that he ran a really good race. He actually got past, came back on to repass Hot Rod Charlie for second while losing more ground. So I would have liked to seen him take it to him. Knicks Go this year, he's had 2 races where he didn't run particularly well. Some people may say it was because it was around 1 turn. Others, like me, would lean more to the fact it was because he actually got challenged. Once you let that horse run free and clear with nobody pressing him on either side, he's pretty much gone. So I would have liked to see more pressure. That's how I feel about it.
No, I'm on board with you. I think that 1 turn, 2 turn thing is a little bit bogus. It's based on a very small sample size, and it has more to do with the pace of those races. Obviously, Knicks Go did get a real challenge from Charlatan in that 1 turn race in Saudi Arabia. Not the case here, as Bob Baffert, who also had Medina Spirit, it just seemed like the plan was never to apply pressure. If you watch John Velasquez's body language coming out of the gate in this race compared to a race like, let's say, the Kentucky Derby, the Awesome Again, there just was not that same intention to get Medina Spirit into a forward position. I don't know if that was because they didn't want to end up inside, maybe that Bob Baffert saw a lot of the races collapsing just before the Classic and he wanted to stay outside for the entire race. I don't know what the story is, but Medina Spirit, I mean, he showed that he could actually pass some horses and run a really nice speed figure, arguably one of the best speed figures of his career without the early lead, so I think that's a feather in Medina Spirit's cap. And Essential Quality, the other 3-year-old in this race that I guess would be vying for that 3-year-old male championship, I thought he ran his race. He just wasn't quite good enough in the end. I mean, he's one of these horses that had kind of developed this narrative around him that he would always do just what he had to do to win races, and there really was no ceiling for him. Well, I think we saw what the ceiling is for Essential Quality in this race. He did not get as favorable a pace scenario as I guess his connections would have been hoping for, and I thought he put in a game-late run. It's just he was the only horse that was really doing significant passing in a race that you said was just kind of like a merry-go-round.
Yeah, I thought he ran a really good race. His 128 speed figure was the best he's ever run, topping the 127 he got in the Belmont Stakes. But he showed he's a horse that's maybe a little bit pace dependent. He was able to stay a little closer in the Travers, but that was a race that was a glacial pace, and he only had to run down Midnight Bourbon, who, no offense to Midnight Bourbon, he's a really good horse, but he's not Knicks Go. So it was just a different level of competition, and I think we can see now he's a horse who does need a little bit of help because he doesn't have that early tactical speed.
And Craig, we're probably going to talk about this in much more detail in the coming months. Last year we did an Eclipse Award preview show where we debated some of our votes and opinions, and maybe we'll do that again a little bit later in the year. But coming out of this race, I think this does set up one of the most hotly debated Eclipse Award categories, with Medina Spirit and Essential Quality both vying for that 3-year-old championship. I'm kind of up in the air. I wouldn't say that I've made up my mind about this one. I think there's a case to be made for both of them. I do think that this race does matter because both of them, in finishing second and third, they beat some good older horses, arguably the best older horses out there in the country aside from Knicks Go. So I think this does bolster each of their credentials, having faced some older runners and beat them. But clearly their wins in the Classics early in the year, Essential Quality's Travers, Medina Spirit's Awesome Again. To me, it makes them the 2 leading contenders for that award.
Oh, for sure. I think it definitely is going to come down to those 2. I mean, I guess there's a couple other fringe players who we'll talk about Life is Good later. I think Hot Rod Charlie basically eliminated himself with this performance and haven't been DQ'd in another race. So, yeah, it's going to come down to those 2. And I would imagine we'll do that show again this year because I think there are some fun races to talk about. They're not all gimmies like we've seen in some years past.
All right, let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Turf, the race run right before the Classic. And Craig, this was a situation where the pace really did develop on the front end. The 2 speeds that we anticipated to be out towards the front, vying for supremacy in the early going, that is what happened. They both went out there, Tribhuvan and Acclimate, and Tribhuvan actually was able to get the lead from that one, but those 2 opened up a big margin on the rest of the field early, and that did set it up for a closer, and it turned out that the one who made the last move was the one who made the most dangerous move, and that was Yabir, who, boy, when this horse gets rolling, he just has this massive stride that gobbles up the ground, and he was able to get past Broom in the final furlong.
Yeah, Yabir's a horse I kind of half jokingly threw out as an alternative to the 3-year-old Eclipse Award. And I don't really think he could win, and I wouldn't vote for him on top. But it's pretty impressive for a 3-year-old to win this race. I haven't went back through the years and looked to see how many there have been, but I don't think there's been very many. I continued the European dominance of this race, and it was a really nice ride by William Buick. He just absolutely timed it perfectly. Broom, who I know you will remember that I liked, looked like a winner turning for home. He had kind of opened up a length and a half on the field, and he fought it out really game to the wire, but just couldn't hold off the 3-year-old. So, yeah, the stride on that horse, once he kicks it in the stretch, it's something to behold.
And I think the big no-show in this race was Tarnawa, who was right at the back of the pack with Yabir in the early going, but he just ran right by her on the far turn. Tarnawa was in a drive from a long way out. She just was one of the many favorites who did not show up on this day at all, despite getting a good trip. I don't know what the story was. Maybe she came out of the race with some kind of setback, but she was clearly not herself. Yabir did make that big move from the back of the pack, but I do want to give a big shout out to the runner-up here, Broom, who made an early move under Irad Ortiz, wide around the far turn, got there maybe a little bit too early, was just run down. I thought both of these top two finishers ran great, and clearly Yabir is the exciting one coming out of this race, just being 3 years old, and also the fact that Yabir is a gelding, so I think we're likely to see him a lot more over the next few seasons. And Godolphin and Charlie Appleby, they apparently love shipping to the U.S. with all the success that they've had, so he's one that I anticipate we'll get to see stateside in the future. At least I'm hoping so, because he's a really exciting horse to watch run. This was a race that was just dominated by the Europeans, Craig. The top 4 finishers all trained in Europe. Actually, the best American finisher once again was Channel Maker, who was able to finish 5th here, but he was beaten by a superfecta that was comprised of European runners.
Yeah, I don't think Channel Maker is going to win any Eclipse Award this year, but I hadn't really noticed that. Amazing to point out that once again, he was the best American finisher. So excited to see Yabir come back. He did race here a couple times this year, and who knew that Turf Triple on the NYRA circuit produced some really nice performances this year.
Right, moving on to another race that was heavily impacted by the pace. Breeders' Cup Distaff, a somewhat surprising result, probably more than somewhat, and also a disappointing result for people that were looking forward to the coronation of Latruska in this race, capping her excellent season. Well, it didn't happen because Latruska just found herself in a pace situation that was never going to allow her to be successful. They just went nuts on the front end. I mean, once Private Mission was sent so aggressively from the rail, Horologist from the outside, She Dares the Devil outside of her, they all had the intentions to be forward in this race, and it just set up a crazy suicidal pace duel, Craig, one that we rarely see in 9 furlong races at this level.
Yeah, this was pretty insane. You don't see a lot of sub 22, sub 45 fractions early on going 9 furlongs. That sounds like almost like an old Kentucky Derby when horses like Gulch and Sinister Minister and some of those crazy fast horses were still able to get into the Derby. So this was wild. I would say it was pretty foreseeable. I think we kind of not hinted, we pretty much said it on the forecast, if memory serves, that Private Mission we were almost sure was going to go from the rail. And I kind of said I thought she would be the leader. She really took it to Latruska. The pace fractions or pace figures were in the 150s early, and that's just something you can't really sustain in a big quality field like this one. So it set it up for the closers, and that was quite the wild scramble in its own right. Just horses all across the track, and I thought all the top 4 ran well. They could have ran, I think the result, if you ran this race with the same pace 10 times, you might get each of these horses winning it a couple times. Maybe Dunbar Road had the most trouble of them, so maybe she was best, but the March Lorraine, the Japanese horse, was just game as could be to be able to make the lead as far out as she did and still hold off the others. The top 3, to show how tight it was, all got 124 TimeformUS speed figures. The next 2 got 123s in Clairiere and Royal Flag. So I don't think any of them ran bad. It was just who was going to get to the wire first.
No, among those closers, I think this race featured the right exacta. Marsh Lorraine and Dunbar Road, they ran the two best races. Dunbar Road did have some significant traffic trouble leaving the half-mile pole. She was actually ahead of those four other closers that finished in the top five at that point in the race, with about a half mile to go. But Jose Ortiz, I think, just stuck to the inside, maybe a fraction of a second too long, and he got caught in behind the quickly tiring horologist, so she lost some position leaving the backstretch. He had to swing outside. Might have ultimately been to her benefit a little bit, though, because I think making the last move in this Breeders' Cup distaff was what you wanted to do. And Marsh Lorraine, I mean, she made that big sweeping move on the far turn. Looked like maybe she was moving a little bit too soon, taking that 2-length lead to the top of the stretch. But she was able to gamely hold sway late for the entire stretch drive. It seemed like somebody was going to pass her because Malathot was there, Clairiere was coming, Royal Flag has that big kick, Dunbar Road coming back. I mean, they were all coming after her, but Marsh Lorraine just dug in to hold them all off. And I mean, Craig, this has to be one of the biggest Breeders' Cup upsets of all time. I mean, this horse came in, unlike some other Japanese contenders in this Breeders' Cup, with no reputation, had not competed in the top races in Japan. Really, the Japanese dirt horses that we see come to this country are generally not that successful. So this was a huge shock, but you can't deny that she earned it.
No, she definitely earned it. And I mean, it's just kind of a crapshoot with these horses. We don't get a lot of shipping back and forth with our horses to Japan or, the other way around. So big effort from her. I mean, there's no doubt the product Japan has is very good. I mean, the racing is top quality. They're getting more and more American influence in their pedigree. So while it was a huge upset, I don't think it's something we're not going to see more of as time goes on, because the racing there just keeps getting better and better. I actually stay up pretty late and watch it on a lot of Friday and Saturdays when they have their big cards. So it's a really nice product. And I, despite the fact that it didn't help me at the betting windows at all, I was happy to see this horse win.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this race does settle the 3-year-old filly championship, with Malathot just barely edging out Clairiere for third in this race. If anybody was doubting Malathot would win that award, I mean, she's beaten Clairiere every time this year, and Malathot, even though she lost this race, she ran pretty well against the older horses, and she seems like a deserving champion at year's end. Craig, let's move on to another turf race on this Breeders' Cup Saturday card. One race earlier, that was the Breeders' Cup Mile, and yet another victory for the Godolphin and Charlie Appleby team as Space Blues gets the job done. Really, you could not have asked for this favorite to work out a better trip. Once he got forward in the early going and over to the rail, he was always going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, this race, unfortunately, was another of those that was a bit of a merry-go-round. I mean, Smooth Like Straight was able to establish the lead. Blowout was just kind of floating in second, never really challenged him. And Space Blues got a perfect trip once again in behind from William Buick. Once they turned for home, I don't really think the result was ever in doubt. There was little doubt Space Blues was going to pass Smooth Like Straight. He's a very good runner, and he's always there at the finish, but he hasn't proven the most game. He tends to give it up in those last 50 yards more often than not. So good effort from those two. 124 speed figure from Space Blues. Nothing to get too excited about for a race of this stature. Definitely below par. And that was about it. I mean, I guess you could say Ivar ran pretty good, seeing he had the 14 post, and he was the only horse really making up ground at the end, like significant ground to get up into third. He was only beaten a length and a half, but basically the top two look like the exacta for about the last 7 furlongs.
It was another weird situation for the Charlie Appleby Godolphin team with their other runner. I know the one that you liked, Craig, Master of the Seas, coming out at the very last moment, having reared up in the gate. Legitimately, this one actually did rear up in the gate and hit his head, so they scratched him, rightly so. But Space Blues was able to come through as their other horse, obviously the more heralded of the two, and he just completes an awesome career, having won 11 of 19 races, came into this race with a win streak, had really gotten good in the second half of his career. And I mean, he was just an awesome horse who was a 7-furlong specialist overseas, was able to carry that speed going a mile here. In Europe, he had been coming from way off the pace with a big late kick, but I think they were smart to get him closer to the pace here because it just didn't develop on the front end the way that we thought it might with those two speeds in there, Smooth Like Straight and Blowout. Blowout just didn't do any pressing at all, so able to get the job done. Space Blue's probably the best horse, like you said. Smooth Like Straight really had no excuse, but you gotta love Smooth Like Straight. He's so game. I think he's run 7 times this year actually, and he has not lost any of those races by more than a half length, even though he just has that one victory. He's always right there at the end, so you have to admire a horse like that, but he was second best on this day. I guess there were some trips in behind Craig. I thought that Ivar ran okay to be third from post 12. He was one of the few horses to make up significant ground in this race, but I mean, behind him, I didn't think that there were that many excuses. There were some tougher trips in some other turf races we saw among these 2 days.
Yeah, and part of going the mile, especially on that Delmore course, is you better have some tactical speed most of the time because you got to get that early position. So the shocking thing to me in this race was that Space Blues actually went off at 2-1. He looked a lot stronger than that to me, and a horse like Mo Forza, who I didn't like at all, was second choice at 3-1. He wound up finishing last, and I just didn't see it from him. The betting really surprised me in this one.
No, I didn't like Mo Forza either. He was basically eliminated at the start. There was kind of a crush of horses coming together as Flavien Prat came over. Or not Flavien Prat, I'm sorry. The rider of Blowout, Joel Rosario, came over from the outside post and caused quite a bit of crowding, and Mo Forza took the worst of it, getting squeezed back. But he did no running after that, so I don't really know what to make of his performance. Like you, I thought that 3-1 was a real underlay on him. Let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Sprint, Craig, as we go back to dirt, and this was yet another significant upset. I know that the winner, Aloha West, was only 11-1, but I mean, I don't think anybody was expecting Jackie's Warrior, who went off as the odds-on favorite, to be off the board in this race. I don't know. I guess Jackie's Warrior just wasn't himself, because you look at the pace of this race and it's not like it was that fast. It shouldn't have been outside of his comfort zone, and he just threw in the towel at the top of the stretch.
Yeah, he did. And honestly, to me, I never got the impression he was going to win as they entered the turn. He just didn't seem to be traveling like he usually does. He wasn't showing that high speed. The pace figures were 130, which is fast, but it's nothing. It hasn't been well within his realm before. And he just didn't have it. I don't know. Maybe it was the pressure. He was kind of tackled from the inside and the outside, receiving a little pressure. But whatever it was, that wasn't the Jackie's Warrior we've seen, because he's been not only fast but super game, and he was basically done at the top of the stretch. So didn't show up at all, and that left it to one of the more exciting races you'll ever see. The photo was pretty crazy. We had a couple of them this weekend, but somehow Aloha West was able to edge out and Dr. Scheibel in, I would say, the very last inch of the last stride and get up. He got a 118 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. Dr. Scheibel ran great. He showed that all those wins weren't a fluke. He moved up to a career best 122 speed figure. His is higher because he was a lot closer to that early pace, just 3/4 lengths back after a half mile compared to Aloha West, who was 4 lengths. But really, it was just those two. I thought Following Sea ran well. He got a nice pocket trip, just wasn't really good enough. He got steadied a little bit, but I'm not sure he was going to finish any closer than he really did.
Yeah, I mean, I think Following Sea might have been a little more dangerous with an outside post position, but that's something we talked about going into the race. The rail was always going to be a difficult draw for him, and I think we saw that it didn't really work out to his benefit with that slight trouble at the top of the stretch. I don't know if he was going to win the race, but he did. He was compromised a little bit. As for Jackie's Warrior, I really don't know what to say. I mean, the first quarter was not that fast, at least for a horse like him. They did pick it up a little bit in the second quarter, holding that pace steady. And Jackie's Warrior, if you watch his prior races, he's not a horse that always travels the turns that well. And it seemed like when horses ranged up outside of him, he just almost lost his will a little bit. He took no momentum into the top of the stretch. So I don't know what the story is. I mean, I guess they'll give him a break after this. But yeah, he just did not look like the Jackie's Warrior that we had grown accustomed to seeing. And I thought the other 3-year-old, Dr. Scheibel, ran really well, as you said. I mean, the pace was honest. I didn't think it was a blazingly fast pace, but he did well. I think the outside post actually worked to his favor, unlike following C, because he was able to inherit the lead once Jackie's Warrior kind of threw in the towel. But Craig, I don't want to take anything away from Aloha West, because this horse did not get off to a great start. It's not like he just sat at the back of the pack. He actually made a big middle move into the race. If you look at his TimeformUS pace figure line, I mean, Jose Ortiz hustled him midway through the race to make a big move on the turn just to get into contention, and he sustained that through the stretch. I loved watching Jose Ortiz handle his stick through the lane, because it seemed like he briefly forgot about the underhand rule. He kind of switched the stick over to hit Aloha West with the overhand strike, and then he thought better of it, switched back to the underhand, and just basically hand rode the horse to the wire. It was just beautiful to watch. And Aloha West, he got his nose down in the wire. I know some people were a little bit skeptical of that photo, because I think the NBC camera wire maybe gave a slightly different perspective, but I mean, we can trust the photo finish technology in these situations. Aloha West did win this race.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know why they're using that camera. It's bad. And the people on TV didn't seem to know it's the mirror and not the finish line. That is the actual finish line. I say finish line, I mean the pole. They were focusing on that. But I think most seasoned horse players were pretty sure right away Aloha West won, especially if you're familiar with Del Mar and the angle of the camera. I know I was. I thought for sure he got up. But it was pretty darn close. And there were a few photos, including the one in the distaff that was very close as well. That probably changed some people's days around quite a bit for better, some for the better and some for the worse. But that's racing. Noses are going to make a difference, and we saw a couple of them in these races.
No, I agree. I mean, watching in real time, you just get a sense for these things when you watch them so often, and I felt like Aloha West and Marsh Lorraine both won clearly in real time. I think this one, the Aloha West photo, was a little bit closer than I thought it was watching it the first time, but he did get his head down at the right time. And for people that are not aware, photo finishes, it's not a typical picture. I mean, I saw some people on social media doubting the veracity of the photo finish for this race. I mean, Google how photo finishes are created in all sports, and I think it'll make you realize that it's not something you can monkey or doctor with. I mean, that's how this race finished. But yeah, Craig, I think this is going to be one of the most hotly debated Eclipse Award categories, because there really is no deserving sprint champion among the dirt horses. I mean, Aloha West was winning his first Grade 1 here. Dr. Scheibel, I mean, let's just be honest, he was not facing the toughest competition in California throughout the entire year. He probably ran the best of the established horses coming into this race, but do you really want to reward a horse that lost the Breeders' Cup Sprint by a nose to another one that ran just as well? I mean, Jackie's Warrior, I mean, he was the big favorite coming in, but looking back, I don't know if he really has a championship-level resume with just one Grade 1 victory. This one's kind of up in the air.
It is. We do still have the Malibu, so maybe that could add to the resume. I imagine it maybe one or two, maybe even three of these horses will show up there. Following Seat could show up. Not that I think he would be a worthy winner, but maybe Jackie's Warrior could give it a chance. Maybe Dr. Scheibel. I'm not sure, but just going to hold off on that. For me, the disappointing part is the speed figure. Just a 118 from the winner, similar to what we got last year. It's dropped off quite a bit since the days of Matoli. Usually you would expect an upper 120, 130s type figure. So I'm not sure what's happened to our sprint division. We had a couple fast ones earlier in the year, and Jackie's Warrior, Life is Good, ran some fast ones. But it's just disappointing. We're supposed to be the king of the sprinters, and I'm just not seeing it recently.
No, I think a lot of people expected this to be one of the fastest races of the day with Jackie's Warrior in the mix, and once he didn't show up, I think that kind of fell by the wayside. The top two, they ran fine. They both ran, I believe, career best numbers for them. Just nothing particularly special going back over the long history of the Breeders' Cup spread. I will say, though, just wrapping up this race, I am excited about the emergence of Aloha West, because I think he's a horse that's going to stay in training next year, and I love these closing sprinters. He's kind of like a Kaylee's Caleb's Posse type with that big late run. And I just love watching these horses run over those short distances with those big late moves. So I'm hoping that he's one that's able to maintain this form, because he's an exciting horse to have be a cast member in this division.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, he's been good all year. He's won 2 of his last 3. The one loss was just by a neck, or maybe it's 3 out of 4. And he had a lot of blue fractions in the races he lost where it was kind of against him. So he's one that's going to need some pace all the time. But I'm with you. I do like these horses that come running late.
Craig, once again, we saw the strength of Japan on display in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. This was actually the first ever victory by a Japanese horse in the Breeders' Cup, as Love's Only You got the job done here at 4-1. And this race was really a story of the patience shown by her rider, Yuga Kawada, who didn't get suckered into making the early move that some others did, just waited long enough, had real confidence in his mare, and she was able to get up right before the wire.
Yeah, I would say of the top 5 of this race, 4 of them easily could have won if you changed the trips a little bit. Love is the one I think she basically ran her race and wasn't good enough. But the others, Love's Only You, My Sister Nat, Warlike Goddess, and Adaria all ran fine. They just didn't get the best trips. It was a really good ride. And it was good. Like you said, he was patient. He saved some ground most of the way when the others were swooping by on the outside, kept his cool. Maybe he had to slow down just a hair in there, but it was worth it because once she got through, it was pretty obvious she was going to win. This one wasn't the surprise the other Japan winner was, because this horse had really good form there, was only 4-1 on the tote board, but just proved kind of what I was saying earlier. The racing is really, really good in Japan. So it wasn't a surprise at all. She got a 126 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. So big effort. My Sister Nat, another one that ran big, kind of showed her last speed figure wasn't any fluke. And I thought Warlike Goddess ran really well in here. She just moved early, as you say. Now, maybe there wasn't a lot of choice. I'm not really knocking Julian Leparoux. When you're a big closer like her and dead last, sometimes you have to make that early wide move, because if she waited, who knows? I doubt she would have had the same finish. So tough trip for her, but just a really good one. And Adaria, I guess you have to mention. Can't blame William Buick at all. He did little wrong from the 12 post. He actually got her a great ground-saving trip. It's not like she had to drop back to last. She was in position, but unlike the winner, she just got stymied and had nowhere to go. Once she got out, she was absolutely flying, but it was just too late and tail of the trips.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people saying that Julian Leparoux totally blew this race and gave Warlike Goddess the worst trip of anybody. Watching it back, I don't totally agree with that. I mean, if you watch Warlike Goddess's prior races, she always makes her move at around that point in the race, and this was a race that featured an honest pace, and I think she moved into the part of the race that you want to be moving into, the slowest part of the race. He just did it while losing a lot of ground around the far turn, but maybe that's kind of what he had to do, because like you said, I mean, look at what happened if he tried to stay inside, like William Buick did with Adaria. I mean, she just found all sorts of trouble. I mean, ran right into the back of the fading going to Vegas, lost all her momentum. I mean, I'm not saying that Adaria would have won this race, but I don't want to rule out that she wouldn't have, because, I mean, she lost a good 3 to 4 lengths of position at the top of the stretch. She was going to be involved at the finish, and she did make a big late move in the stretch when she finally got out. She just had way too much ground to make up. So, I don't want to be too hard on Julian for losing all that ground to Warlike Goddess. I mean, My Sister Nat got a very similar trip. She moved a little bit after Warlike Goddess, but she also made a big wide move on the far turn and almost got there in the end. As for the winner, Love's Only You, a different kind of Japanese pedigree than we saw with Marsh Lorraine. If you look up Marsh Lorraine's pedigree, I mean, she's been a Japanese bred on the dam side going like all the way back to the 1930s. I mean, she's not one of these horses that has this big imported European or U.S. pedigree, aside from having a little bit of Sunday Silence in there, as all of the top Japanese horses seem to. But Love's Only You on the dam side, she's got a real familiar American European pedigree. Her dam sire is Stormcat. I think that the third dam is Miesk. So a real familiar female pedigree on Love's Only You, but of course she is by that great Japanese sire, Deep Impact, too, that they just lost in the past couple of years. No, exciting to see these Japanese horses do so well, Craig, because kind of like with Charlie Appleby having so much success with those Godolphin runners, they just keep running more in the US now, and we get to see all these top European horses. With Japan suddenly having the success in the Breeders' Cup, you'd imagine we're going to have an even bigger Japanese contingent next year, and I look forward to seeing that.
Oh, for sure. Like I said, there are just so many good horses. She just came in with an impeccable resume anyway. She had, unlike the Distaff winner, she had run in all the big races. She won one of the big grade ones in Hong Kong. She had run well at Maidan. So there was nothing fluky about this result at all. She is a really good mare.
Moving forward to the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, contested around 2 turns at Del Mar. And Craig, Life is Good. Obviously, the heavy favorite coming in, and this is one favorite that did not disappoint on Saturday. Once he made the lead heading into the clubhouse turn, this race was basically over. He had to run fast to do it, but, I mean, you could tell he got very comfortable on the front end, and there was just no stopping this horse.
Yeah, it's a race I don't think we have to spend a whole lot of time on because, as you said, it was basically over at the start. He actually did get challenged early. The 2 Japanese horses both tried to challenge him. 8 Rings tried to challenge him, and it just didn't work. They're just not good enough. He's too good. You almost wish after seeing this race that Life is Good had went in the Classic because maybe it would have been a much more exciting race. He wound up with a 129 TimeformUS speed figure. His pace figures were all in the low 130s and just basically one eased up. So really good race from him. I'm not sure what the plans are. I know he is supposed to race next year. I just don't know what races he's being pointed to. But I would imagine he's going to head into next year as the leading candidate for Horse of the Year.
Now, Craig, this is a race that featured almost identical opening 1/4 mile to the Distaff, but, I mean, explain briefly why the pace of this dirt mile was so different to that of the Distaff. Obviously, you know that there's a big difference in run-up between these two races, but I think a lot of people had the misconception after watching this race that Life is Good had set some suicidal pace, but that's just kind of the way these Del Mar races play.
Yeah, one thing people aren't taking in, I see a lot of people talking about raw fractions. Obviously, in the mile, the run-up is a huge factor because I believe it's about 200 feet off the top of my head. Sometimes I get it mixed up with Santa Anita. And they do that so that they're not starting too close to the first turn. So, in essence, this is a 1.70-yard race or so. And also, it was a very fast track on Saturday. It led to some really good final times, and it also led to some fast fractions. So the mile in this case, it just looks supersonic when in reality, it was a really strong pace, but we don't even have them coded in red. So it wasn't anything too crazy. As I said, the track was fast overall. I mean, the Classic went in sub 2 minutes as an example. So nothing on the fraction side to get too excited about. He's a fast horse for sure. He had to outrun some other speed horses, but it was nothing compared to the Distaff, especially when you consider he had to go another furlong as well, or a furlong less. The Distaff had to go further.
Yeah, and that is completely captured in the TimeformUS pace figures for people that are unaware of that. I mean, that's why setting the exact same fractions, the early pace figures of the Distaff were in the high 150s, where for Life is Good, they were in the low 130s. And you're right, Craig, the run-up for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile is exactly 200 feet. It's listed at 45 feet for the Distaff, and it's listed at 20 feet for the 1.25 Classic. So the pace of this Dirt Mile, relatively, was much closer to the Classic than it was to the Distaff. I just want to make that clear, even though the fractions, the raw fractions, might paint a different story. And yeah, Craig, I don't have a whole lot else to say about this race. Life is Good, just better than these horses. To me, this does not suddenly insert him into the conversation for champion 3-year-old because he frankly was not beating a championship field in this race. There just wasn't a whole lot behind him, especially once Silver State completely failed to show up. This was not the toughest field, certainly not a championship race. So I think that the other 2 3-year-olds that competed in the Classic have much stronger resumes.
Yeah, the kind of funny thing about this is Life is Good, while I don't think he's a contender for any Eclipse Award as well, he may very well wind up costing Medina Spirit if that one doesn't win because of those 2 times he was able to beat him. Those weren't races that would elevate his portfolio very much, but they would certainly help Medina Spirits.
Moving on to the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, and we saw another dominant performance here, Craig, this time from the Wesley Ward-trained Golden Pal, and I've got to say, this is a horse that has always carried a great deal of hype around him, primarily stemming from what Wesley Ward has said about him in his morning trading and how much he respects this horse and his speed and ability. I had never really gotten the hype, Craig, until this race. The way that he broke and just dominated throughout, this was pretty impressive.
Yeah, this race was over in about 4 strides. It was pretty crazy how fast he was able to get out there. During our preview of this race, I had kind of highlighted his 138 pace figure last time and had a feeling he was going to be able to outjump the other horses. Now, I didn't pick him to win because I thought maybe Lieutenant Dan would be able to stay a little closer and wear him down, but that early advantage, even though it shows only 1.25 miles after I think it's the first 3/8 in a 5 furlong sprint, or it shows 1.5 miles, he was up a good 3 lengths, 100 yards into the race, and just nobody else could make it up. He ran a career best 125 TimeformUS speed figure. Lieutenant Dan, he ran just fine. He ran a 122, which is very similar to what he's been running all year long. So good effort from those. And I do want to give a shout out to your long shot pick, Charmaine's Mia. Thanks to you, I was able to hit the superfecta in this race, which made it a really nice day. But yeah, those two were just dominant. Nothing really happened in between.
Nice. That makes me happy to hear that, actually. Yeah, Charmaine's Mio, no match for the top two, but was happy to see her get back on track and run her race to be third. Yeah, the top two, they ran excellent races. Golden Pal and Lieutenant Dan just didn't quite possess that brilliance coming out of the starting gate that Golden Pal did, but I thought Lieutenant Dan chased him gamely throughout. Some people who watch this race live might notice that, the initial time that flashed up of 54 and change, had that since been revised. This is a race, Craig, that it really has almost no run up. So the opening quarter did kind of raise some eyebrows a little bit that it could be that fast. It's not like Golden Pal was going as quickly as he possibly could out of the gate, because while he did break so sharply, he quickly settled in what was for him a comfortable pace on the lead. But he just kept running at that same rate for the entire race, and he was sprinting through the wire. It was just a race that the closers never had any chance to get involved in.
No, and I do want to check out that opening fraction. I did time the final time, the adjusted time in the charts. Certainly looks good to me. The opening quarter, we have it coded in blue, only a 113. That seems a little bit fishy. I'm not saying it's wrong. I really don't know at this point, but it's something I want to retime, especially when the visual doesn't match the clocking as strongly or match the pace figure as strongly as this one does. I want to give it a closer look. I'm not sure what was going on with the timing in the turf sprints. A couple of them were adjusted over the weekend, but the final time was definitely good.
Let's close out the Saturday action, Craig, with the first Breeders' Cup race of that card, the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, and we saw another heavy favorite go down to the feet as Gamine, just not herself. I think a lot of us who had watched her throughout the year, we kind of saw this coming. She really had not looked like the dominant sprinter that she had been last year throughout all of her victories this year. Despite the fact that she was getting the job done, she just didn't seem to have that same spark and flair, and that was on display here. She looked vulnerable. I picked the wrong horse to try to beat her, but CC Craig, she's always been reliable. She shows up in these races, and she just was right there to take advantage when the two other favorites didn't show up.
Yeah, CC's got quite a resume now, having won a few grade ones, back going long, including I think it was the Apple Blossom, now the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint. It was a good solid effort from her, 118 TimeformUS speed figure, so the same figure that the winner of the sprint got. She actually ran a 120 final time, but the two speed horses to me were really disappointing in here. Gamine, who I wasn't as surprised by, didn't really do any running. The pace wasn't that quick at all, and she just kind of spit the bit. But unfortunately for the bridge jumper, the people who try to bet against bridge jumpers, she was able to outfinish Bella Sophia, who I thought was equally disappointing. She had looked really good in New York this summer, won some of the biggest races, including the test, pretty easily, and just couldn't reproduce those speed figures here. So In my opinion, there were only three horses who could ever win this race. It was Gamine, Bella Sophia, and Cece was able to take advantage. Edgeway did run a good solid race to get second. She had been easily handled by Gamine in her last start, but that just shows Gamine was probably even more off form than she had looked previously, because Edgeway was basically running the same speed figures all along.
Yeah, and look, it just wasn't the most stellar Breeders' Cup race that we saw on Saturday, with those two favorites failing to show up. And yeah, like the fact that Edgeway was second, I think, is just sort of an indictment of the quality of this race. But give full credit to Cece. I mean, she always runs a nice race. She doesn't possess the brilliance of a horse like Gamine, but when those don't show up, she's right there to take advantage. And I mean, in my estimation, I'd be leaning towards her having taken this championship away from Gamine. I mean, I know Gamine had that body of work throughout the middle of the year. She does have a couple of Grade 1 victories, but she split two decisions with Cece, and Cece won the race that really matters. So, I mean, I've got to look at it a little more and weigh it. It is probably one of 4 Eclipse Award divisions coming out of Saturday that could be debated, the others being sprint, I should say male sprint, male turf, and female turf. All of those are a little bit up in the air, but Cece, I think, definitely put herself in the conversation.
Yeah, and hats off to the connections. Trainer Mike McCarthy realizing that maybe sprinting was a way to go with this horse, because she did have that success in routes for a time, kind of faded off, and he turned her back, and it didn't work out the very first time. But ever since he's mostly stuck to these 7 furlong and 6.5 furlong races, she's kind of recaptured her old ability. So it was a really good move on his part that you don't often see trainers make, the change from router to sprinter.
Well, Craig, let's move backwards to Friday, and a lot's already been said about it, but we've got to talk about it. That fiasco at the end of the day, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. We'll discuss the actual race in a second, but what happened before the start and in the lead up to the race, it really was a black mark on Breeders' Cup weekend, and I think it turned off a lot of people to the racing and the wagering aspect of it, and rightly so, because this sort of stuff, it should not be happening in 2021.
No, this was an embarrassment for everybody involved. There was no reason for it. And it continued after the race when they came out and had a press conference about what happened. And the very first thing they said was that the one horse Modern Games had reared up and hit his head and then broke through the gate. And the combination of those things were why the horse was scratched. Why the vet recommended he be scratched. And then when you watched, I was like, wait a minute, that horse didn't rear up. And a couple days later, you find out, no, they come out and say, because I guess for a minute they thought maybe nobody had video. But clearly the horse never did rear up. And it was shown on the day of the race that he was let out the front of the gate for good reason, because there was a horse on the ground and didn't want to get kicked or have him stepping on the downed horse. So I don't have any problem. I mean, things are going to happen. The 2 horse caused all those problems, fell down. It was smart to let him out of the gate, but just everything involved with the humans after it's just an embarrassment.
Yeah, and you can connect this to a lot of different things. I know that day in and day out at the racetrack, there's not always the most strict adherence to accuracy across many different facets of horse racing, Craig. And that should not, though, carry over into racing's biggest day. And when facts are so easily verifiable by the people watching and the betting public, it's troublesome that those whose job it is to adjudicate these things and to state clearly and plainly what happened are just willing to ignore the basic facts or not verify that they are correct. It's a big problem. And obviously, and that's with regard to the statements that were made afterwards. Obviously, there was a miscommunication and a little bit of hastiness before the race in whatever transpired with that vet declaring this horse a scratch or phoning it into the stewards before they should have. Probably also a little bit of a breakdown in procedure with multiple people apparently being able to phone in scratches when that's not usually the case at Del Mar. So that just probably was setting up a problem to arise, and that is what happened in this race. But it's very disappointing. It should not be happening. And once you had that initial mistake, I don't think that should have precluded the stewards from going back and reviewing the entire situation, because I think the component of this that no one's talking about is that the horse that did rear up in the gate, Albar, and was justifiably scratched, the one that got stuck under the gate, he actually did thrash and interfere with Dakota Gold, who was just in the gate outside of him. That is the actual horse that should have been examined by the vet to possibly be scratched. And ironically, that's the horse that all the people who had Modern Games scratched into during the race. And forget the fact that Dakota Gold seems fine and he ran 5th in this race. Maybe that's the top finish that he would have achieved regardless. I mean, that just compounds the fact that the bettors who had Modern Games got completely screwed over in this situation.
Yeah, and I mean, I know this might sound silly, but I ran a business before I worked for DRF and TimeformUS doing the same thing with speed figures. And I had things go wrong with customers. I mean, we're not perfect. I mean, where's the apology to people? I know it wouldn't change one thing or put $1 in anybody's pocket, but isn't that the first thing that should happen? Is somebody come out and say, we screwed up and we're really sorry about it. That goes a long way. People do a lot of bad things in this world, and when they sincerely apologize, it tends to, people are a forgiving lot for the most part, but we've yet to hear a word. We've heard nothing but excuses and a lot of double talk about it. And frankly, I just find the whole thing disgusting. And you didn't even mention the Dakota Gold race, who actually somehow went off the favorite in here. And it could very well be due in part because still sitting in the chart from his last race is a time that's just ridiculous for the race. I just don't get it. The whole thing is a mess, and it kind of all came to a head in this one spot. And I just can't imagine trying to explain to a newcomer that maybe had the one horse singled in a pick 5. Maybe they went to the track with a friend and they'd never been, and they sit there and watch the one horse roll home and win easily, and you tell them they lost. I mean, is that person ever coming back to the track? I know some people who are hardcore players who probably won't be back for a while. So just a really ugly situation, and you have to expect better out of our leadership.
Yeah. As you said, the bettors deserve an apology. What they don't deserve is these statements that are being put out that are just trying to diffuse accountability among anybody. Obviously, there were specific people in this situation that made a mistake. And I think, as you said, taking some accountability and apologizing would go a long way. I know that they're going to put in place some different procedures for the future that might make it much less likely that this will happen. That whole purse money only scratch rule, that's a different beast that I think has to be tackled another time, because that rule is prevalent in many districts, and there are many components of that make it good and bad in different situations. But this clearly was an error, and some steps have to be taken to make it right. I think we should move on, Craig, and talk about the actual race. Modern Games, just more domination by the Appleby Godolphin team. The third victory for them at this Breeders' Cup. All of these winners for them were sons of Dubawi, who is just this amazing stallion that they've had such success with. And Modern Games seems like a pretty exciting horse for them.
Yeah, he's very good. If I remember right, I think he was my pick in this race. I can't always remember these things. But yeah, he ran great. He ran a 104 TimeformUS speed figure. He was clearly much the best in this field. So not a whole lot to add to it. It's just a shame that it turned out the way it did, because it overshadowed what was a really good performance, because I didn't think the pace was super fast, and he was able to sit a good trip and just absolutely explode home.
All right, let's tackle the rest of this Friday card, Craig. The race before the juvenile turf, arguably the feature of the day, was the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Obviously, this race lost some of its luster at the last-minute withdrawal of Jack Christopher just the night before this race. Kind of took away that anticipated matchup between him and Corniche, and I don't think it's a big surprise to anybody that without Jack Christopher in the race, Corniche was able to clear despite breaking from an outside post position, and he was just able to control this race on the front end, although he did set some honest fractions.
Yeah, he ran fine. This race was definitely anticlimactic to me because once the scratch happened, I thought it was pretty much a done deal what was going to happen. I mean, the other main speeds in the horse were all are in the race were also trained by Bob Baffert. We know they're not going to go out there and duel with each other, and he was the more fancied of the trio. So that's exactly what happened. He ran fine. He got a 113 Timeform US speed figure, career best. He's 3 for 3. No knocks on the horse whatsoever. I would assume he clinched the Eclipse Award with this one. Papa Cap ran fine to be second. Never really thought he was in danger of getting the winner, but that was about it. It was just kind of an average race, a boring race to watch without a whole lot happening. And like you said, I was probably a little disappointed before it even started.
Yeah, it played out, I think, the way that it was always going to once Jack Christopher came out. Yeah, as you were alluding to, those Bob Baffert horses, they just were not going to apply that pressure to Corniche in the early going. He set an honest pace. He was able to kick away. It briefly looked like it might get competitive on the far turn when it seemed like Corniche was slowing down a little bit, but he found a little bit more in the lane and was able to get away from those horses late. Same exact as the American Pharaoh, with Papa Cap finishing second. Command Performance, the no-show. I don't have a whole lot else to say about this race, Craig. I think we'll see some other 3-year-olds emerge next year as these horses turn a year older. I'm not sure that the same horses that we're seeing doing well in this Breeders' Cup Juvenile are going to still be around the time that we get to the Derby preps and the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people lamenting that he's not getting any Derby points and all this and that. There's plenty of time for that. I wasn't blown away by this race at all. I would be surprised if we see the same group of horses favored when we get to the first Saturday in May.
Moving on to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies turf, as this one produced a pretty exciting finish with horses strung all the way across the track, and I think the big story coming out of this one is the ride that Jose Ortiz gave Pizza Bianca. It's one that's going back and worth watching because somehow he got this filly from literally last of 14 with a quarter mile to go up to victory on the wire.
Yeah, it was something to watch, and I believe this is one of the races I remember seeing where he was wearing the helmet cam, so it was particularly interesting to watch how he was able to weave through the traffic and never really had to even so much as steady, and that made all the difference because he only won this race by a half length. Time-wise, it wasn't the most exciting race. The winner only got a 97 Timeform US speed figure, but in turf, that late kick often matters more than the final time, and I thought she did just fine. I mean, she made up 7 lengths. She was 7 lengths back in 14th place after 6 furlongs. So to get up to win is no small accomplishment, even if she did have to work out a great trip to do it. She certainly has a big closing kick.
Yeah, once she got through at the top of the stretch, you could tell that she was going to finish with a big kick, and she was able to get there. But this was just a blanket finish across the wire. Many other horses could have won this race with different trips. Some others went a little wide. Some others had traffic. It's definitely one to go back and watch. My long shot Cachet gave me a big thrill for a little while on the lead, but she ultimately had no excuse at the end. She took a 2-length lead in the final eighth of a mile, but it was like the cavalry charge coming after her down the lane, and they passed her at the end. But yeah, Pizza Bianca, I think the most surprising thing about her, Craig, was that she went off at almost 10-1. I mean, I know she was the morning line favorite, and this was a tough race to make a morning line for, to say the least. But breaking from the rail for Christophe Clement, I know we had never won a Breeders' Cup before, but that just seemed like a crazy price on her. She got it done.
Yeah, the line was the most surprising for me. And congrats to Christophe Clement because they were bringing up this new thing on NBC where it's almost like the golf where they talk about the best player to never win a major. They turned it into the best trainer to never win a Breeders' Cup race, and they immediately put him in the winner's circle after they kept bringing that up. So I don't know who would get that title now. It's probably something that's pretty arbitrary. I don't think it was a knock that he had never won one, but you're always happy to see what seems like a good guy to me win a race of this stature.
I think the most dominant performance that we witnessed on Friday was in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies as Echo Zulu resoundingly clinched that championship, winning this race by over 5 lengths, achieved a faster final time than Corniche did, winning the Juvenile. But Craig, the way that this race played out at the start, it did kind of set Echo Zulu up to be pretty tough to beat in this race.
Yeah, this kind of had a little classic feel to it when you go back and watch the replay, where most likely the second best horse, Juju's Map, didn't really challenge her at all early. She was able to run all by herself, and it was basically game, set, and match that quick. She was never getting run down, but that said, I don't know that it would have made a difference because she was that dominant in here. She wound up with a 114 Timeform US speed figure. Ran pretty evenly throughout. We don't have any of the fractions coded, but it was a little on the tepid side early as she went from a 107 pace figure early to a 115 final figure. So clearly the Eclipse Award winner, the best 2-year-old filly in the land, if not the best 2-year-old based on a record so far. Still have a few questions about how she handles some more distance with pressure because she's got more of a sprint-based pedigree, I think. But hard to knock this performance at all. It was about what you'd expect on a championship day and probably the best one we saw on Friday.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so much it was a lack of aggression by the other riders. Juju's Map just broke a half step slowly and then got bumped off stride by Tarabi. So, I mean, Florent Giroux, he was last, basically a few strides out of the gate. He just never really had an option to go after Echo Zulu, and Hidden Connection stumbled out of the gate. So, just circumstances that conspired to allow Echo Zulu to get that easy early lead. But, I mean, she's a horse that she's shown in all of her prior races. She's the consummate professional. She always breaks well. She's got that easy speed and she relaxes on the lead. So, I mean, Joel Rosario just had the easiest job guiding her to the front and doling out some moderate fractions on her, and she spurted for home when she was asked to. 114, it's a solid speed figure for a 2-year-old filly at this time of year. And like you, I wouldn't say that I'm supremely confident that she's going to love a 1.125 or a 1.25 if they ever try her going that far. But she's handled every test up until now. And the gun runners have really showed no limitations whatsoever up until this point. So she's definitely an exciting horse moving into next year. Let's wrap things up, Craig, with the first Breeders' Cup race that we saw of the weekend, the only Grade 2 event, and just not really the championship level race that some others are, but the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint, still a fun one to watch. No surprise to see Wesley Ward win this race for the third consecutive year.
No, he seems to have a hammerlock on this race. He took it again this year, also ran third. And neither one of those two were his favorite. Averly Jean was actually finished back in fifth while never really looking like a winner at any point. Twilight Gleaming ran fine, showed the quickest early speed, and as we saw at Del Mar all weekend, that was often a recipe to success at 5 furlongs. Set a solid enough pace, got a 106 overall Timeform US speed figure, so I never quite know what to make of this race. I mean, I would imagine if I went back and looked at the list of winners, I wouldn't be overly blown away. We don't have a big turf sprint division in this country, so maybe he'll show up in the turf sprint next year, but other than that, you just kind of get those grade 3 type turf sprints all year long, so I imagine that's where we'll see him. He doesn't look like a horse to me once any parts are stretching out. Go Bears Go, who I know we both liked. I think you even had him on top. Gave me a thrill for a few seconds there. Looked like he might catch him, but ran a really good race. Just wasn't quite able to get there.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I thought John Velasquez gave Go Bears Go a nice trip. Twilight Gleaming, kind of like Golden Pal. She just had that speed coming right out of the starting gate, and she got that early advantage, which, like you said, was so valuable in these 5 furlong turf sprints at Del Mar. I would prefer to see these turf sprint Breeders' Cup races run over a course that can accommodate more than 5 furlongs with no run-up, but that's just my personal preference. I know that they typically run these races in Southern California these days, or at those Kentucky tracks where you can't run even more than 5.5, so that's just the way that it is. But speed was so dangerous in Twilight Gleaming, they simply weren't able to catch her, and Go Bears Go fared the best of the Europeans. So, Craig, that wraps up the Breeders' Cup action. There was a lot to get through, but looking back on it, if you had one moment that really stuck out to you as impressing you the most, what would it be?
I would probably say Life is Good. Not so much the speed figure, because I knew he'd run fast, but just the way he was easily able to repel some horses who seemed pretty intent on getting the lead in front of him, and he had no problems handling him. Drew off, wasn't the strongest field, but he was the horse. Like I said, I think he's got to be the favorite for Horse of the Year next year if he can stay healthy. It's a shame he wasn't in the Classic, because I thought he was probably right there with Nick's Go as the best horses to run this weekend.
Yeah, for me, it would be the final quarter mile of Yabir. I mean, that horse just looked like a bear barreling down the middle of the stretch, running by them all at the end of that race. I mean, you rarely see horses produce that kind of kick at the end of a mile-and-a-half race. So he is an exciting horse, and I just love that he's a gelding, and we'll probably see him many more times in the future. So that was probably the moment for me, though obviously I was also impressed by Nick's Go winning the Breeders' Cup Classic. I think that race did live up to the billing in terms of those top four facing off against each other. Nick's Go just got the scenario that he needed to be successful, and he'll probably be our Horse of the Year for 2021. So, Craig, that's all of the action to recap for this week. We will be back later in the week. I don't know if you've looked much at the racing that's upcoming yet this weekend, Craig. I know I'll be filming a couple of stakes previews later this week, but we'll find some sequence to talk about, I think, come Friday.
Yeah, I haven't looked at all. I'm still recuperating from this weekend. A lot of mental highs and lows, a lot of work. So just kind of relaxing for a few days, and we'll dive back in with some videos on Thursday, and I'm sure we'll come up with something for Friday.
Same here. I feel like I always need to take a little bit of a mental holiday after the Breeders' Cup. You do so much work for that week, trying to stay on top of these races, having your takes all set, and when you actually get to watch them, sometimes it's almost anticlimactic, but we did see some nice performances, and there's a lot to take in looking back at these races, but we'll reset this week and look ahead to the racing action next week when we do the TimeformUS forecast this Friday. Remember that you can always listen to these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up on Friday.